Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Kaizen Central from Manufacturing TV. It's blowing a storm outside right now. I'm hoping, I've heard from some people that they're finding it tough to get home through some flooding in the north of England and so on. So fingers crossed, we'll be gathering more to the fold very shortly. I really would like to thank Neale Lewis for agreeing to be our guest tonight. I just think what he's going to talk to us about is of utmost importance. A quick anecdote to tell you why it really excites me that he's joining us. Some years ago, our local district council economic development officer, he was a very, very, very keen networking organizer, and he'd bring loads of small businesses together. And I asked him, I said, look, you really seem very keen on promoting small businesses and making certain that that they can do business with each other. Why aren't you going after bigger businesses and bringing them into the area? He said, I'd far rather 100 businesses in this area employed one person each over the course of the next year than attracting one large company that can bring in offer 100 jobs. He said, because if that company ever goes down, all those people are going to lose their jobs. Far more resilient to have a lot of smaller companies doing better. And to that extent, what he was really describing was what Neale and ourselves will be talking about now. It's about scaling up. Neale, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Nick. Great to be here.
Now, scaling up is that the same as a growth strategy? Is scaling up just the verb you'd use to describe a growth strategy?
It's a word that's actually becoming more and more used. Even the Prime Minister used it a few weeks ago, and every time I watch The Apprentice, they kind of use the word scaling up. It actually comes back to, I think I'm right in saying this, the official definition of a scale up in any economy, and that's why they're really prized, is an organization that's growing 20% year on year for a period of 3 years or more. So that's either 20% revenues or 20% in terms of the number of employees. So they're really highly prized. You know, we know that every single day there's lots of startups that are born, but the challenge of getting sustained growth, being able to grow out 20% year on year for 3 years or more is significant. And that's what we do. We understand the challenges that they have. We help them in terms of overcome the barriers that, again, I guess quite a few guys on the call today will no doubt have faced. And they play such an important part in our economy. It's these mid-market companies that are established that more than likely are going to create jobs in any given community. It's these mid-market manufacturing companies that are being able to really sort of grow out, probably are going to drive growth through innovation. So, yeah, to your point about growth, yeah, it's a significant part. They, by default, are very focused on growing and growing sustainably.
But it does have a specific meaning, and that's good to know. So when we're talking about scaling up, we are talking about that's those specific targets. My anecdote at the beginning about sort of a rising tide of all companies, I imagine that is why this is of such an important discussion for the national economy. The more companies that can do this, obviously, they'll grow from smaller into medium-sized and on up. And that is of importance not just to them and their communities, but the whole economy.
That's exactly it. And I think that's exactly why governments around the world, cities around the world, regions around the world have put such a focus now onto scale-ups. But in many respects, Nick, many of these companies are hidden champions. And I'm reminded of a great book actually called Hidden Champions by a guy by the name of Hermann Simon. And he's German, and he recognized the importance of these hidden champions, or the Mittelstand in Germany, that are often family-owned, mid-market manufacturing engineering companies that actually really drive the German economy. And they're called hidden champions because actually they've grown out. Many of them are big global organizations that family owned, have certain traits about how they've had sustainable growth with building out very strong marketing and sales competence, building out real focus on training, building out a sort of whole sort of focus on innovation, but often in a really deep niche. And we may well be using them in our day-to-day work. So there's one example of Karcher power tools. So you may well use a Karcher power tool on your front drive or on the patio at the back, that are significant global organizations. So I think this notion of championing a lot of UK companies that are potentially the next hidden champions and helping them on their growth journey, both in the UK, but also a lot of companies I work with, is giving them the confidence and the ability to go and export as well.
I'm wondering about whether a scale-up mentality, although you've been talking about mid-market companies, can small companies have a scale-up mentality anyway? I mean, this isn't something that is simply restricted to companies of a larger size.
No, exactly that. And, a lot of entrepreneurs right from the beginning, right from the nugget of having an idea or seeing, a business opportunity, will already have a dream of taking it to the next level and building it as far as they can. So a lot of it has to do, to your point, around mindset of having a significant vision of how the organization is going to grow, often either through luck or by great innovation, being able to come up with a USP or a product that is going to fly somewhere. But yeah, it does require a mindset. And again, we often find that people come to us of maybe still very small businesses, but have that ambition, have that desire to grow out. And most importantly, have got a growth mindset themselves, so that they know they haven't got all the answers, know that they need to surround themselves with the right people, the right advisors in order to achieve just that.
And I suppose there is a query to that, which is that a scale-up strategy is not for every company. There are some companies for which simply scaling up is not possible nor desirable.
Yeah, and there's probably, I can't remember exactly how many, but maybe in the UK at the moment, there's probably about 10,000 companies that are, by the definition I gave earlier, are scaling up. But there are many businesses who right now it wouldn't be right, or it's not part of their ambition. They're very happy being where they are, just giving a good service to their customer base, don't want to really grow out anymore, quite happy to just maintain the status quo. So it's not necessarily for everyone. I think by default, over time, if we can encourage more businesses to unlock their entrepreneurial flair, that'd be a good thing. But as I said, you have to have that mindset as well. So there's lots of business up and down the land who, are quite happy, being the size they are.
So let's talk about a company wondering how to do it. What are the things that are going to get in the way of a business doing this for themselves?
Well, I think, and often I use the sporting sort of analogy that if you want to have peak performance, it really does make sense to surround yourself with some great people. There's not very many great tennis players or golfers or indeed football teams that don't have a plethora of coaches and mentors and people who've already walked the walk. So I think most of the people that I work with tend to have this notion that in order to achieve success, then they need to surround themselves with the right people. So I think that's a critical sort of factor. But a lot of people and a lot of their peers that they connect with, I've never really seen an organization have a coach or have an outdoor set of advisors or an advisory board or that. So it's not something that they're kind of used to or would see as enormous. So I think that's, again, in other parts of the world, that is more than normal. I think we've got a lot of work to do in the UK to help people understand that's a good thing. It's not that you're failing, that you need to have people around you to help you be your best. At peak performance, as I said earlier in the sports field, top performers realize that to be their best, they have a raft of advisors. And it's often difficult, Nick, when you start out, and let's say you are an ambitious manufacturing company, you've got revenues around 2 million, you want to get to 4 million and then to 8 million. But at that stage, you can't necessarily afford to have a great sales director. You can't afford to have a great finance director. You can't afford necessarily to have a great production director. So you have to kind of look at different ways of getting the right talent on the bus, but making sure it's affordable. So I think it's good news nowadays. There's lots of organizations that provide interim or part-time financial directors or CMOs or resources like that, that it makes it much more affordable because you're sharing the cost with others. So I think that first point is about making sure wherever you are on your journey, that you've got a good team of people around you. I think that the second point then is still about who. And Jim Collins calls this brilliantly, and he talks about getting the right people on the bus and get them to sit on the right seats. So one of the first things we get to work on is helping people to understand what the right seats they need to have in their organization, and then making sure that we get the right people sitting in those seats. And again, for most people, it's not something they ever get taught. You don't get taught necessarily how to go and hire great people. It's through the University of Hard Knocks that you realize you take on a raft of people that don't work out. And I think that's why most businesses in the world never get much above 10 people, because you kind of get out to 20 or 30, you created a monster. You look at it, they actually are much better just going back to me and a few folk, and we all got on at that time.
I remember talking to somebody about barriers and about not knowing why, after a period of strong growth, all of a sudden a small company or a company of any size, but if it's not aware, it just hits a wall. And it's because the mindset, the way that the leader/leaders deal with their people has to change at a certain point. Is there any guidance on that? Is there any way of just trying to understand that? Because I thought it really extraordinary that, yes, you could be going along, humming along, doing your 20% a year, and all of a sudden, bang, everything grinds to a halt, but you just find it a lot more difficult to get that extra marginal increase.
We call it the valley of death. And it happens at lots of different levels. At first level, it probably happens when you get to about 1 million in revenues, Nick. And at that point, you're probably going to have around 10 employees, maybe. And it's the first time maybe you don't ever start to know everybody by their first names. And you then have to start putting a structure into your organization. And if you're unable to do that, or you haven't been able to hire great people, then that becomes the first barrier, or the valley of death. And that's hard. And again, it's probably one of the reasons why I think I'm right in saying this. It's probably only 4% of companies around the world, probably less than manufacturing companies, that ever get above 1 million in revenues. So that's one value of death. And you have around, when you get to about 5 million, potentially another value of death, and then 10 million. And they're all different reasons, but a lot of it is down to structure. When you get to these different levels, it often means that you need to put another layer of structure in. So you may have a leadership team, then you need to put another layer beneath that. And that becomes difficult. Or you need to start thinking about strategy, and that's something that you might not have in your locker. Or it means that you need to start thinking about culture of your organization, and that's something, again, that becomes problematic. So at each of these different levels, 10 million and then 50 million, you suddenly hit this glass ceiling or brick wall or whatever we want to call it, which is really frustrating for a lot of people, because they don't necessarily know why they've hit this brick wall, why they find it really difficult to grow out behind that. And the other area is really important to understand from a CEO perspective or an entrepreneur, is that the traits of getting a business started require a lot of energy, a lot of effort. It's a bit like turning the flywheel. When you're trying to turn a heavy flywheel, it's really difficult to get momentum. It's really difficult to get things moving forward. But the type of character, often an entrepreneur, is someone who's very driven, very focused, very competitive, very happy to overcome all the obstacles in their way, often resilient. But when you get to building out a company beyond 10 people or 20 people or 30 people, then you suddenly need to be somebody who gets on with people. That's often somebody very different to the founder. And that's often, a really significant frustration to them, because they then realize either someone will tell them that you need to get a good people person in order to help run the business, and they step to one side if they find that a challenge, or step out of the way.
Well, I think that if anybody's watching this on the live stream on YouTube, and I know we've got a handful of people watching tonight, if you've got any questions or comments, please enter them on the screen, then I can pass them across to Neale. And of course, anybody in the room right now, what about your own anecdotes, your own the challenges? Barry, I know that Playdale has been on a particular growth path in recent years. I'm wondering if how much of what Neale's talking about resonates with you.
All of it. So I sat there nodding and going, oh yeah, okay. And then you described to me as well about, yeah, it's different now. You have to get on with people, but no, we've been through that journey. You know, we've actually won scaled up awards. You know, and our international stuff over the last 10, 12 years. You know, has been growing at 20% a year for a number of those 10 years. But you know, it's the UK bit that faltered, and you know, and that's another aspect to it. Different divisions in businesses can be growing at different speeds, and you know, you can have an really entrepreneurial area of a business and one that's stuck in its ways and almost could be in turnaround. So, you know, and again, that's as a business grows. You referenced good to great, which is great about the journey, and you know, getting people on the bus, which I use the analogy all the time. And but there's another fantastic book out there, guys. Blitz Scaling is about, and it's Chris Ye and
Reid Hoffman.
Reid Hoffman.
Yeah.
LinkedIn and PayPal. Yeah. So
library somewhere.
Yeah, I've probably got it behind me as well.
Yeah.
But you know, they're all similar about, you know, all the stresses that you go through. I think they use some good analogy, don't they, of from a gathering to a village to a city to you know, the different mentalities that go on with these scaling up businesses, and it is a challenge, and it's all to do with people and mindset, culture.
Yeah. I think that's a good point again that you raised there, Barry. I've forgotten about that. I think what Chris and Reid talk about almost chimes back to those valleys of death I talked about. That when you get to a hamlet, you know, that may be sort of 1 million, then you get to a village, you know, 5 million, and then sort of to a town. All of them require a different mindset, a different way of thinking to navigate through those stages.
Yeah, I call it the messy middle. I don't know other people call it that. You know, it's like you've established it's all exciting, away we're going, and then all of a sudden it becomes a little bit sticky and didn't see this one coming. Oh, and that person's just left and they were really key, and you know, all of these, and it you know, it can be like walking in something very sticky, and then you can go again, or you choose to retrench and, you know, go back.
Yeah. Is it possible, Neale, that a company that finds itself in the messy middle, valley of death, wherever you want to call it, could actually become seriously derailed if it doesn't know how to handle growth? Yeah,
I think it can become seriously derailed. And I think, again, Barry made an important point there about the importance of people. If you get the wrong people on the bus, who've got the wrong intentions, and they find that your culture is all gone awry, that can just take you so far away from where you envisaged you're going to be, take up so much energy. But there are plenty of other things. I mean, just think about the last 24 months, you know, the whole challenge that so many businesses have been through, so certainly in the manufacturing sector, that you think you're in a good space, and then through no fault of your own, you know, suddenly your market might have come to a grinding halt, and then you may have to pivot. And I think what we've done an awful lot over the last 18 months, unsurprisingly, is help companies who may have a really good core competence. They might be very good at some element of manufacturing, but that particular market's dried up. It's then helping them to realize that actually there might be a growth market somewhere else, and to realize that their core competence allows them suddenly to change their operation, to pivot in a way that suddenly, you know, allows them to take that opportunity. And I can't remember, but I'm going to go back to Jim Collins again, because he talks about productive paranoia. Can you remember about productive paranoia, Barry? That you need to almost be relentlessly concerned about what could be happening, in the market, and put the business onto not war footing, but always just kind of asking fundamental questions about, are we going in the right direction? How are our competitors going to be figuring out how they can derail us, and those sort of things. So it is important, even if you're doing really well, to have some sort of productive paranoia, just to make sure that you don't totally fall off the rails, to use your words.
You've got to be balanced with it, because something that I struggle with massively is exactly that. And that it stops you celebrating your current wins. And that's it's something, you talk about coaching, I've had business coaches in, and it's like, celebrate more. No, but I'm worried about this and I'm worried about that. And Barry, stop bloody worrying and just celebrate the moment. And, it's, and when you're talking about what an entrepreneur is and the mindset and constantly moving forward, is, I think I'm more on that side of the continuum than, hey, let's have a good time.
But it's also going back to that sporty analogy. And again, there's one wonderful book that I really recommend to all your listeners, watchers, review, and it's by a guy called Jack Stack, and it's called The Great Game of Business. Now, Jack runs a manufacturing plant, remanufacturing plant in Springfield, Missouri. But his whole notion of the way you go about doing business is built on 3 tenets. Number 1, know and teach the rules. Just like in sport, everyone knows the rules. What's in play, what's out of play, what you can do and what you can't do. And that's the fundamental in business, that you know and teach the rules. And everyone knows what's in boundaries, what's outside of boundaries, how you're going to play the game. Number 2, make sure that you follow the action and keep score. So wherever you are in business, and in sport, who's winning and losing. You've got a scoreboard at the end of the thing. And then again, it's really important, certainly now more than ever, that if you have got some mini wins or you've achieved things in the business, you are finding ways of celebrating, just like the fans do. When someone scores a goal or win the race or whatever it is, there has got to be some sort of celebration to demonstrate we're winning. And then the final thing that Jack talks to is give everyone a stake in the outcome. So people, if they feel like they've got a vested interest in the company, it could be just through some sort of share ownership or through the bonus scheme they use. Everybody knows if they are winning, that they do well out of it. If they're not winning, then it's more of a challenge. But it's a great book. It's called The Great Game of Business. But it, again, goes back to sort of its tenet in manufacturing organizations around the world.
How do you spell the last name of the author?
Jack Stack. Stack is in stack 'em high, sell them cheap.
Jack Stack. Great Game of Business. Thank you. Ram, you've raised your hand. Ram Shaker.
I have indeed, yes. I do have a question. Thank you for that, Nick. Neale, you just mentioned a little while ago when you spoke to Barry that looking at competitor analysis and all of that. Now, that's one school of thought which talks about, the productive paranoia, is the competition going to do this, do that? But then you have the other school of thought, like, for example, the Blue Ocean Strategy, the book by Chan Kim, where we talk about, make your competition irrelevant. Now, how does an SME like Equitas, my company, how do we balance these two philosophies of thought, and where should the focus be?
Well, I think when you're starting out, I would always have a relentless focus on not necessarily your competitors, but what your customers are and what their met needs are, and delighting them the whole time. Because if you spend too much time looking over your shoulder at your competitors, then you lose sight what's really important, and that's finding maybe a niche in the market, a product that people need, and then ultimately just 100% focus on delivering great customer service, or delighting your customers. I think that's fundamental. But at the same time, it's certainly strategy always teaches us just to make sure that you've got a good appreciation of where your competitors' strengths are, maybe where some of the weaknesses are, where some of the gaps in the market are coming out of that, and you make sure you play to your strengths, but also cognizant of what your competitors are doing. And again, we'll probably talk about Jim Collins an awful lot on this call, because, by the way, another great book, and I've just got my screensaver on, but it's B 2.0 is Beyond Entrepreneurship, which is Jim's latest book. So anyone who's a Jim Collins fan, Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0 is a highly recommended read. And again, it's just making sure that you've got that sort of relentless focus on what's really important.
Neale, let's talk just a little bit nitty gritty. Oh, I beg your pardon. Philip Kernock has a question. So please, Phil, go ahead.
Hi, Neale. Thanks. Couple of areas of interest that I like, and this barrier point of 1 million and the point of that size of scale of business. Some businesses I work with have an insatiable appetite for innovating and flipping their business. In the aerospace sector, a lot of companies have had to flip their model and go into other sectors. Who would have thought a year and a half, 2 years ago, aerospace was probably a very, very solid sector, and then suddenly, very, very quickly, that a lot of companies have had to flip, and they've gone into pharmaceutical and other sectors and had to get the quality approvals in those sectors. But other ones very much are continuously innovating their products and doing it in a way of actually the customer element, focusing on the customer, but continuously asking the customer for feedback, continuously asking the customer, we're thinking of developing this, we're thinking of going this direction with it. What do you think of it? And that stimulates a kind of circle of continuous development, both with their customers, but then able to develop products that then they can take to market in different directions. So, but you don't necessarily get MD owners that have that innovate skill set to go and do that. And that's the challenge, and sometimes it's a people's person, but dependent on the commodity and the service and the requirement, it may be a highly innovative market where you have to continuously develop your products every 6 months, every year. And I find that those companies get through that £1 million barrier, and because they've got those base products, but then they go on and innovate again and again and again and progressively build their business.
Yeah, and we look at some of the very best products in the world. We're doing this call, I'm doing it on an Apple laptop. I've got an iPad not far from me. I've got an iPhone not far from me. And they just constantly innovate, not a massive change, but they're growing growth the whole time by small changes to the camera or a bit more speed in terms of that. So I think you can be innovative by just consistently making improvements, or we're on the Kaizen call today. It's not constant, never-ending improvement. Apple have created so much global value just by iterating, not by bringing a huge new product into market, but just constantly innovating the iPhone. I think was it just the launch of the iPhone 13 this week. Again, to create billions of value for them, probably just by a few iterations. And I think often as entrepreneurs, you can get sidetracked into chasing lots of shiny objects.
Yeah,
and they're just going all down lots of different streets and different alleyways, and without really realizing, that it makes sense just to get laser-like focused on what's really important.
I agree. I mean, we obviously work in the advanced engineering sector a lot, and we're seeing the emerging technologies of electrification, hydrogen, and people looking at their own business models and seeing how their products can be adapted to use in those emerging technology markets. Because I think that's where a lot of people need to be looking in the future. They need to be looking for somewhere else, an emerging market position. Because sat in the same old market, the aerospace market has got thousands of small, medium-sized machining companies. They're all very, very similar, very, very difficult to differentiate themselves. So they need to be creating products that are going to go into different emerging technologies, whether it's electrical vertical aircraft or, hydrogen solutions or electrification. But I think there needs to be more companies that really do inwardly look at themselves and decide how they get into those markets and what products they develop.
Yeah, we use a very straightforward tool. We call it the sweat model, and it's just to build on the SWOT analysis. But the one difference here, if the SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, the S and the W stay the same as strengths and weaknesses of your organization. But the fundamental difference here is trends, and being able to take time out as a team to look at the trends in your marketplace. And therefore, to your point, if the trends are moving away from a combustion engine that drives an airplane to it could be hydrogen driven or solar panels in the future, you're going to spot that and see trends or gaps in the market. If you've got your head down in the sand and you're literally fighting fires the whole time and you're chaos, you're not going to have to take the time out to do that. And the point I was going to make, going back to Jim Collins a bit earlier on, he talks about the benefits of having a strategic council.
Yeah.
A strategic council, 3 or 4 key members of the organization whose job it is to look at trends, to obsess on what's happening in the market, to look and see what the competitors are doing. Yeah, fine, other people are going to be looking at in terms of making sure they execute the plan, but having a group of folk who are coming together on a weekly basis to looking at those trends in the market, making sure that, they might not be the right time now, but, what are we doing about this? Or something is cropped up. How are we going to respond to that? Is a really valuable way to think about it.
Thanks. Back to you, Nick.
Neale, I wonder if we could talk about get a bit more technical about scaling up, because there is a framework. I know that you talk about, you call them the 4 priorities. Do you want to just give us a little bit more detail on that?
Yeah, and we probably touched on most of the priorities already. But these are priorities that any organization is going to focus in on and build competence around as you get from that startup phase to scale up. So number 1 is all around strategy and having a distinctive strategy in your market. We just touched on some of the things about making sure that you are alive to the trends. And we've got a really powerful tool. We just call it simply the 1-page strategic plan. And there's nothing that's simple about it, and it's just really difficult to get all your thinking down onto 1 page, but that's the genius of it, because once you've got all your thinking onto 1 page on the direction you're heading, the key thrusts and capabilities that you need to be focusing on, the priorities for the quarter, even to the type of way you're going to succeed, achieving the 90-day plan, everything that is on the 1-page plan. And again, that's makes execution so much more straightforward. So we've talked about number 1, strategy. Number 2, getting the right people into the organizations and building out from ensuring that you've got the right bums sitting in the right seats. We call that the functional accountability chart, to making sure that processes are running without dramas, to making sure that you've got a robust way of getting great people into the organization. For me, one of the great legacies is whoever I work with is creating a coaching culture. So when I've done my work and taken them through the scaling up process, they can continue to grow. They've got a strong culture, creating more leaders across that organization. And for me, that's a real strength about leaders creating more leaders in an organization. You've got a culture where you can do that, then you're able to then grow up. If you've got lots of great people, one of the challenges you're going to give yourself is we need to grow further because we want to give our team meaningful work. Then we have execution. So once you've got your strategy and if you just think your strategy, we know that one of the big challenges a lot of folk have is being able to execute the strategy without drama. And there's 3 elements within that: really getting clear on what your priorities are in any given quarter. Then being able to make sure that you've got the right data and the right metrics in place so you can ensure that you're following the right score, that you know if you're winning or not. And fundamentally, getting the right meeting rhythms in place. And again, we find a lot of folk are really challenged because they don't have time and the discipline to have meetings at the right cadence, or they don't have meetings at all, or they have a meeting to figure out how we're going to solve a customer or solve a significant production challenge. What we want to get to is meeting rhythm that are much more disciplined. They're all quarterly, monthly, weekly meets, daily huddles, getting a cadence where your business is working in a much more predictable manner makes the CEO sleep a lot better at night. And then the final one is cash. So final four is cash, and we know that growth sucks cash. So that's a massive challenge is, for scale-ups is you can look at your P&L. I think we're doing really well right now. We've grown profitability, we're growing revenue line. But quite often we find that CEOs are not paying attention to the balance sheet. And if you're growing 20% year on year, but you're not really paying attention to your balance sheet, then you suddenly can find out you're maybe growing broke. Your working capital line is really challenged. And I think what I was saying just before we sort of went live on the call today, even right now, you're seeing a lot of clients have got record order books, but they're coming under a raft of challenges around margins, increased costs coming into the business, getting the supply chain, all those things. So those are the four fundamentals or four priorities, Nick.
It's manufacturing companies, do they differ in any way from, in terms of the demands on them in scaling up from any other business? I mean, is it the same for them as it is for any other business?
They'd all say it's different. We're totally different, don't you know? We're in this sector, we're unique. And to be honest with you, there aren't many that are, so different that those four priorities are not relevant in some way, shape, or form. At any given time, there are going to be some that are more challenged around cash, others that are more challenged around their strategy, others that are more challenged around getting people doing the right things or having a great team of A players. So that they're often in a different cycle. And then obviously as you grow out, you kind of sometimes starting all over again in these areas. I suppose the only really fundamental difference of clients we probably have are those that are in the real tech sector, and a tech company that just suddenly goes on fire and is not growing 20% year on year. They are doubling, tripling, quadrupling the size almost every 90 days. Probably not that manufacturing companies to do that, but tech companies that really get on a roll require, again, a very different sort of guiding hand.
Let's talk about cash for a second, because you talked about the fact that growth can suck, the growth process, getting across the valley of death, sucks a lot of cash up. And you've got, in many cases, to go out and find it from a bank or an investor or whatever. Is the culture, the financial culture in this country, sympathetic to that, or sufficiently sympathetic to make that not a given, but not too arduous?
Well, like anything, the financial institutions, the banks, a private equity company take a lot more confidence if you've got a good steer and handle on your cash. No one likes surprises. So if you can come across that you've got real competence, you understand your balance sheet, your business model, it probably is an awful lot easier to persuade people to come and invest in you. So I think that's something that sometimes people find difficult to understand. A lot of companies that I work with just simply have blind spots around the numbers. You get the CEO who's got probably a good steer on the way the company's performing, the FD, but a lot of folk around the board don't really have much of an idea in terms of, if they would be truthful, what exactly does debtors days mean? What exactly is working capital position? How can you improve the cash conversion cycle? So these are all such important areas to understand, because if you're growing, certainly a manufacturing company, you're growing quickly, well, it does require a lot of investment. If you're investing in significant plant or machinery or new factory, that can be intensive around that. So yeah, it's important. No, it's not important. It's really, really important that as you scale up, that you've got a really good handle on cash and you become competent and financially aware.
Yeah, because we often on these calls, we do take a bit of a baseball bat to the financial institutions in this country, because we say that perhaps they're too focused on short-term goals and there's not enough patient capital in the market that really takes an interest in the long-term growth needs of manufacturers. And I'm wondering if in other countries, and perhaps this is also something to do with the way governments view manufacturing, whether in other countries this process is easier. Have you got any thoughts on that or any experience on that?
I probably haven't got so much experience, but I know that the example I gave earlier on about the mid-market companies, the hidden champions in Germany, that they take such a long-term view on everything, on the whole outlook, and anybody who's investing in those companies has the same sort of philosophy, the same viewpoint, that we're not here to make a quick buck. We're here around for generations. And therefore, we don't need to make the same return on capital investment as maybe an investor who is looking for maybe a more a short-term payout. So I think that's important. I think again, there's probably people on the call who are much better or much more experienced about fundraising, or which parts of the banking community now are more sympathetic. I work with a number of private equity companies who are investing an awful lot in manufacturing at the moment, and they kind of like to put their point of difference as we're going to invest for the long term, which is great. That kind of gives them a slightly different point. One or two of them also, and that's why I work with a lot of manufacturing companies, when they've invested in that company, want to have someone like myself as a scale-up coach come in and just be that another sort of advisor or somebody who's going to make sure, one, their investment's in good place, but also to help the board grow out, help ensure that all the right processes are in place. So they see, actually, when scaling up, here's a performance platform, an operating system we can put in that's going to make sure that our investment is not, of course, it's not going to be sort of absolutely watertight, but it's more likely to succeed.
What are the resources currently available in the UK to manufacturers who might say to themselves, okay, we know about Neale and his offering, but what else is out there at an institutional or governmental agency level?
I might then pass to some of the other guys on the call right now, because there's probably people, again, much better versed than I am. The ones that I know, and I think I've mentioned this to you, Nick. There's a Scale Up Institute. For one, it's kind of the government body that really champions scale-ups, and they will then, through local enterprise partnerships, ensure that there's a growth hubs at a local level have probably all got resources and expertise to help manufacturing companies. So that's one. There's like the Manufacturing Growth Program. Again, that provides expertise, advice in terms of helping manufacturers and signposting them in the right area. And then lastly, the government has announced two major initiatives to help companies. One, the peer networks program, and then another one that's literally just launched at the moment called Help to Grow. So I think those are the ones that I know about that are designed to provide unfettered support, point people in the right direction, or where they can get the right advisors. So yeah, I'll open it up to other guys who may have some much better suggestions.
Yeah, that's a challenge. Anybody on the call sort of tried to reach out and find resources to help on growth or just general business advice, and what's out there? Alec, I'm going to challenge you, because I know that you have in the past had some experience, and not always an enjoyable one. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Thank you, Nick, for that. I've had my Valium tonight, so I won't get off on one. Yeah, I think apologies for missing the start of this evening, but it's a very challenging environment out there. Particularly, I think if you're not a traditional manufacturing company, the system is geared up for old-style manufacturing with a factory. So we don't have a factory. We have subcontract partners who make machines for us. We have a joint venture overseas. So our assets are basically IP, but in banking terms, they're not worth anything. How do we get past that hurdle? That's the key. We were on the Transforming Food Production Innovate UK Series A program, and we had a serial conversation with one of the lead investors who we had to try and strike a deal with, who said, you've got a disruptive technology and you're competing against two massive multinationals, you can't win. And I'm going, are you really a venture capitalist? Are you in the right business? So, this is the kind of, every road we go down. Some of the programs that Neale just mentioned that we've been on, the peer mentoring, we were probably one of only 2 manufacturers in our peer group. So there's a lot of good intent, but it often misses the mark. And we're still struggling to raise money in the UK, but we are looking at raising money abroad. So there's still a big problem here in the UK and connecting people like us to the money we need to grow.
Yeah. Anybody else had any outreach issues or success stories that they've gone and because Barry, I know that you've been in the market for ideas and support. So perhaps you could pick up on that.
Well, one of my key mantras is collaboration is key. All right, is the key to our success, and we've gone out there and we're constantly still uncovering stuff. And Neale's just mentioned a few of the most recent schemes, but in the last dozen years, we've set up very successful relationships with universities. Currently we've got 30% of all of our staff on NVQs and developing their skills, a lot of them on management type courses. But and a lot of this is free or fully funded. So the Chamber of Commerce offering fully funded courses, IOD heavily subsidized, CBI, FSB is great in the local area. All right, not specifics to manufacturing, but what is fantastic for manufacturing, the productivity through people courses that is running many universities. All right, and is 90% funded. Highly recommend. We've had 4 or 5 people go through that now. That's probably the big brother of what Help to Grow is going to be. So you've got Succession there. So Help to Grow is going to be hopefully a fantastic initiative. It's just started this week, hasn't it? This week or last week was the first cohorts around the UK. We've not got anyone on it yet. There's the Made Smarter leadership courses, very much geared towards manufacturing and technology. So there's plenty out there, and for people to sit and moan about it, I think all feel them, because if you want to get out there, you talked about financial institutions, Lloyd's are linked with the Warwick Manufacturing Group. They send all of their business relationship managers down there. They do a course down there. There's help out there if you want it.
Interesting. Thank you very much. I've been making a note of these, and I'll put them up afterwards, because I think it's really important that we sort of capture some of the knowledge and some of those book titles. Perhaps, Neale, afterwards we can just sort of get those down in an email or something. So I'd like to send those to people. You talked earlier about family businesses, Neale. And I know that in Germany, so many of the Mittelstand companies are family businesses, and they're maturing now. They're sort of second, third, fourth generations, and there is the suspicion, or expressed in some parts, that actually they're becoming a bit woolly. They're not as sharp as they once were. I'm wondering whether scale-up strategies are something that can help a family business say, right, we need to think of the business more than the family, and perhaps find a way to exit successfully using a scale-up strategy that allows us to perhaps pass it on to our managers, or pass it on to our staff, whatever, because they don't want to take over a woolly company. They want to take over a company that's really got some juice in it.
So the first thing I say to all your listeners and watchers here is have a mindset that you are always going to exit your business. Even if you've got no idea of exiting your business, put your business footing on the fact that you are going to exit. Because by doing that, you set out all of the right processes, ensuring you have the right people in the organization, ensuring that you are, everything that you're doing is if you were one day going to get the most multiples you can do for your organization. It just brings about good business practice. And I think when you then, as a family business, it's always good to have some non-exec directors or external advisors who can ask the right questions. And if things are starting to get a bit stale or things aren't working quite right for the family, can provide candid advice, radical feedback, or radical candor, as it were, on where they may be going awry, or if they've lost it, or the next generation have lost it. I think that's a really important factor as well, to have those objective bystanders who can come in and call it and then make the right calls. So those are two fundamental things to think about, and obviously then also to make sure that you're building up, certainly as a CEO, maybe as a FD, your own competence to know actually how to go about ultimately exiting a company one day. And we're probably going to see in the next five years or so almost a perfect storm of, there's a lot of people who set up the businesses, baby boomers who are getting into late 50s, early 60s now, who may not necessarily have a succession plan in place or not have somebody that they can pass the business on to. I think we will probably see an awful lot of manufacturing companies come onto the market in the next 4 or 5 years. And maybe a lot of those were not going to accrue the value that they could do because they hadn't put all those things into place.
Oh, fascinating. That's something I hadn't considered. Yeah, Phil Kernock, thank you. You put your hand up.
Yeah, I agree with Neil's point. There are a lot of companies in our aerospace and defence sector similar to that, privately owned businesses that don't have a progression plan within the family, and are then looking to sell off. But we also see a lot of companies that get to a capping within our sector as well, get to around the 12 to 15 million turnover businesses, and they seem to be ripe for acquisition, because then the finance houses and other groups look at them as a far stronger business model, and as a consequence get acquisitioned. So actually some of the OEMs and major customers get very nervous about that level of turnover getting to that level. Yeah. Because then that causes them untold problems with that company being taken over by maybe another group that may well have a different direction they want to go with the business.
You're so right. And the other thing is to point out that increasingly we're going to see, there's a huge amount of global capital at the moment that people are looking to invest, and private equity companies by default are very good at acquiring companies. They have all of the aces in their card. They know how to sidle up to an organization, how to make them build that emotional connection, and then they've got all the ability to get the maximum amount of value out of that organization. And often the guy who spent years as a founder and the family, putting blood, sweat, and tears, leaves a lot of money on the table because they don't know how to negotiate or don't know how to get a strategic sale or stuff like that. So that is an area that I think, again, advisors can help whoever they're working with, just to make sure that they have got good solid advice on the way forward.
Interesting stuff. Well, listen, thank you very much, everybody. I love the idea of peers. You mentioned peers, Neale, and peer networking, I think is absolutely vital. And collaboration, which Barry mentioned and you endorsed, Neale. Do we all agree that collaboration is very much the way forward, and that adopting a totally competition red in tooth and claw mindset is something of the past? Do we all agree with that? I mean, just put your hands up if you do, but if anybody would like to speak to it, go for it. Barry, yeah. Are you putting your hand up to say, would you like to speak to it? Go for it.
No, I'm just agreeing with you, but it's not just external collaboration as well. I have an internal talent team from different departments working together on projects. You don't know what you don't know. You get stimulation from around you, and it's just exposing yourself to as many external stimuli as possible, and you see projects move forward. And a huge key thing for Play-Doh.
One of the keys to the valley of death, Neale, is that entrepreneurial mindset that says, and I think you referred to this earlier, that says I don't need to collaborate with anybody because this is my baby, and I know how to run it.
Yeah. And you know what? A lot of us get in our own way, and egos get in the way, and a raft of other things. As Barry just talked about, it's all about finding talent, unlocking, unleashing talent. There's a fantastic talent, in the world now. But I think Jack Stack, I mentioned earlier on for the Great Game of Business, he recognized that in manufacturing in the US, they were losing out to talent to what many schools are much more fashionable to careers like tech, doctors and stuff like that. So there was a war on talent. They had to go and find a way of attracting great talent to come and join their manufacturing organization, which brought a different mindset about getting into schools, getting in colleges, talking about being a noble profession. And I think whoever wins in getting the right talent and having the right talent will win, period, end of. I think it is about, it's easy to say putting people first, but organizations that genuinely put people first and find a way of creating leaders in their organization that are, fundamentally, if they've got a good product, that really helps, will win. But that's a lot easier said than done.
And on that note, I think we'll thank you very much indeed, Neale Lewis. Really appreciate it. We'll put these resources out on social media so people can benefit from the wisdom that we've heard tonight. Thank you all very much for taking part. And Neale, again, bless you for being with us. This has been Kaizen Central from Manufacturing TV. We're here every Thursday evening at 6 p.m. We hope you'll join us next time. Take care. Goodbye.